What can you tell us about some of those early giants in the Amateur Mendicant Society?
Yeah, so the Amateur Mendicants were founded in 1946 by Russell McLauchlin. Russell McLauchlin was a newspaperman.
Uh-oh, sounds like Chris went away.
Well, maybe he's pausing to think.
Okay, we thought you fell into the lower vault there for a moment. Okay, go right ahead.
Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from listeners like you who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock and at ihearofsherlock.substack.com. And by Dan Andriakos, Sebastian McCabe, Jeff Cody Mystery Series. The latest, Ding Dong the Witch is Dead, starts with an arrow through the heart on Valentine's Day. Now available in paperback or as ebooks from MX Books and Amazon. And now you can enjoy some iHo's swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers. Available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 331, The Amateur Mendicant Society.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Walder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Walder.
Thank you, Bill Curtis. It's so nice to hear you in your mellifluous tones, even though you're coming up on your NPR retirement. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees, where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Walder.
And Burt, you don't look amateurish at all to me.
Oh, really? Really? I'm surprised by that. I thought this jester hat that I like to wear with these sort of three bells and the green and red colors, make me look less than professional. At least that's what everyone says when I wear it to the doctor's office.
Well,
they say you're not one of the staff here, are you? They look sort of vaguely horror-driven.
No, I'm from the billing department.
Say, why would you think I was one of the staff here at a doctor's office? And they say, well, you're wearing a white lab coat and wearing a stethoscope. And I say, look, that's just profiling, buddy.
Buddy. But, well, we're going to talk about Buddy later in the show. You'll hear.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I didn't recognize that you weren't so professional because my camera is off here, so that's why I couldn't tell.
Oh.
But great show ahead for you today. We of course have a rundown of what's going on in some of the local Sherlockian societies. We'll bring you up to speed on that. We have the interview with our friend Christopher Music from the Amateur Mendicant Society. We have Christian Mongard's latest review, and this time he takes us to the small screen, so stay tuned for that. And, of course, the canonical couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to guess which Sherlock Holmes story it is representing. And if you do that, you get a prize. And I'll tell you what, I will give you something directly from Michigan as our prize this time. How do you like that?
Ooh.
Just happens to be where we keep the IHO's vaults, so it's entirely appropriate. But we'll have something special for you regardless. If you would like to support the show, we ask that you do that on Patreon, on Substack, or through our store. You can buy iHose merch if you'd like an iHose mug. Have our logo staring back at you and saying, I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler. That is available. Also, notepads and oval stickers. Check those out at our merch store. And also check us out on Substack and Patreon. We have links to the show notes, in the show notes to both of those sites. And you can support us for as little as $1 a month. We don't ask too much. We're not greedy. We just like to have a strong community of supporters. Support, what that gets you is it gets you additional content. We publish stuff exclusively for our supporters from time to time, and you get to listen to the show ad-free. So those are a couple of reasons to join us as a paid supporter. Well, here we are with the Learned Societies. My goodness, we are learning about June now. We are all the way into the month of June with our events. Where do we start out, Bert?
We start in Vancouver, British Columbia, with the Stormy Petrels, who are holding a study session on June 2nd, and Sheldon Goldfarb is the contact who can tell you more, and check out their website, the Stormy Petrels, all one word.com.
And the very next day, on June 3rd, the Transfixed Correspondence of Phoenix is having a virtual meeting. Get in touch with Lawrence Sircone to sign up for that meeting.
And on the 3rd of June, contact Shana Carter if you'd like to know more about the Ash Wednesday dinner in Manhattan, and she'll tell you everything.
You can head north of the border on the 4th, June 4th, in Montreal, in Quebec, Canada. The Bimetallic Question is hosting a meeting in person. Edith Poundin is your contact there, and you can check them out at bimetallicquestion.org.
And on June 6th in Baltimore, Maryland, it's the Sherlockians of Baltimore. The SOBs are meeting, having a luncheon meeting. Greg Ruby can tell you more. Also, take a look at SherlockBaltimore.com.
And in a case of whiplash, you're going back to Toronto on the 6th, back to Canada on the 6th, I should say, up to Toronto, Ontario, where the Bootmakers are having a pub event. Thelma Beam can tell you all about that at torontobootmakers.com.
And also on the 6th of June, New York, the Priory Scholars are meeting. Nick Martorelli will be gathering the class, and you can find out more at prioryscholarsnyc.wordpress.com.
And maybe all of this travel up and down the East Coast has worn you out. If that's the case, on June 7th, you can relax in the comfort of your own home in a virtual meeting with the crew of the Bark Lone Star. Steve Mason will set you up with the Zoom details there at dfw-sherlock.org.
And June 7th, if the virtual meeting of the Bark Lone Star doesn't float your boat, you can go to Denver, Colorado for Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients. Derek Belanger is organizing a luncheon meeting, and you can find out more at dwnp.com for Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients.
And then on June 12th in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Tankerville Club will be hosting a dinner meeting, and Dan Andriaco is your contact there. I'll have his Facebook contact up so you can get in touch with the Tankerville Club.
Oh. And back to Canada. The Sespudlians of London, Ontario are having a virtual meeting. Ian Bennett is the organizer, and you can also look at sespudlians.weebly.com.
And just over the border in Keene, New Hampshire, the Monadnock Sherlockians are meeting on June 14th. They're having a luncheon meeting, and Anna Behrens is your contact there.
And June 15th, Columbia, Maryland, Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City are having a dinner. Matt Hall has all the information, and you can check out, too, watsonstinbox.org.
Well, that is it for the first half of June. If you have an event that you'd like to add to the calendar, or if you're traveling and you want to see what else is going on, check it out at Sherlockiancalendar.com. Ron Fish is your contact there.
Sherlockian, magician, mystery writer, professor, and sleuth at large. That's Sebastian McCabe. In a series of lighthearted mysteries by Dan Andriacco, Mac calls on his knowledge of the great detective to solve conundrums in his small town of Erin, Ohio. These adventures are shared and chronicled by Mac's brother-in-law, Jeff Cody, an admiring but by no means uncritical Watson. Readers say the cast of continuing characters, including Jeff's journalist-turned-novelist wife Linda, makes each new book feel like a visit home again. The McCabe and Cody mysteries are packed with Easter eggs for Sherlockians, but they also feature engaging characters, good writing, solid plotting, and a light touch. As Bonnie McBird said, "You're in the hands of a master of mystery plotting here." David Markham calls the series classic Golden Age mysteries set now. The latest in the series, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, starts with an arrow through the heart on Valentine's Day, and that's not even the main mystery. Dan Andriacco's McCabe and Cody mysteries are available in paperback or as ebooks from MX Books and Amazon.
Christopher Music is the Commissionaire and archivist of the Amateur Mendicant Society of Detroit, a scion society of the Baker Street Irregulars founded in 1946. A member of many Sherlockian societies, he received his investiture in the BSI in 2014 as Wagner Knight at Covent Garden. He previously served as Society Reports Editor for the Baker Street Journal and is a volunteer with the BSI Trust. He is also the author of From the Lower Vault, Treasures from the Archives of the Amateur Mendicant Society. Chris Music, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thanks very much, Scott and Bert. It's great to talk to you, especially Bert, since Scott and I talk all the time.
Yeah, I'm much more interesting.
Well, I talk to both of you all the time, and yet here I am, still interested in talking more. Well, this is going to be an interesting one, Chris, because you and I almost need to fly co-pilots on this episode. So I'm sure we'll trade remarks back and forth. But if I am not mistaken, this is your first time on the show, is it not?
It is. I'm a long-time listener, but first-time caller.
Well, why don't we begin like we do with all the neophyte interviewees here and ask you where and when did you first meet Sherlock Holmes?
So my story is probably different than most people that you talk to. I think, most people, they received a copy of, The Hound of the Baskervilles from their dad at age 12, and they read it on a dark and stormy night. I was always a big reader as a kid, but for some reason, Sherlock Holmes never crossed my path. And I didn't get into Sherlock Holmes until my 20s, really. And it happened in a strange way. I had a colleague at work. His name is John Cram. And I would meet with John in his office, and he had a statue of Sherlock Holmes on his desk. And I asked him about it one time. I says, "Why do you have a Sherlock Holmes statue?" And he told me all about his love of Sherlock Holmes. And not only that, he told me he belonged to a group that actually met, and they had dinner and drinks and toasts. And he told me about this group called the Amateur Mendicant Society. And I was completely enthralled. And I said, I have to be a part of this. So I actually became a Sherlockian through the scions. Most people read the stories and then join a scion. I joined the scion and then read the stories. So I came in completely backwards. And, I joined the right society because we've been around since 1946. I'm a great lover of history. And it's the first thing that I sort of latched onto is, how do these groups form? What's the history of these things? Who are these early founders? the BSI and the Mendicants and other places like that. So it's kind of a unique situation, and I still kind of view the Sherlockian world through that lens of the 30s and 40s and 50s. It's kind of why I'm the archivist for the Mendicants today, and it's kind of how I view things. Of course, I play the game, and I've read the stories, and I do the papers and toasts myself, but I do like the historical part of this hobby that we're in.
What were you reading if you weren't reading Sherlock Holmes, but you were a big reader? What were you reading in those times?
I was a huge Hercule Poirot fan. I read everything of Hercule Poirot. I was a big Agatha Christie fan. I read, all kinds of things as a kid, but I don't know why Sherlock Holmes just sort of passed me by, but he did. But I joined, this Sherlockian world with the energy of the converted, So when I did join, I joined hard, I guess you could say.
Well, we're
how
glad
old
you
were
did.
you when you got involved? Was you in 20s?
Probably, my mid to late 20s.
Well,
I'm an accountant and finance person by profession, so when John Cram, who I mentioned, he and I would meet supposedly on budgetary affairs, we would end up talking more about Sherlock Holmes than we did about finances.
So it was all you could do to tear yourself away from the women and the fast cars of the industry. Huh? Oh, good.
But it was a great group. And so when I joined, Roy Pilot was running the Amateur Mendicant Society. So Roy became a really good friend of mine and mentor. And, I just joined the right group at the right time. And, the rest is history.
Well, you really couldn't have picked a better group in these parts because, as you say, the Mendicants have been around since 1946, and they're part of what I call this group of original 8 scions, these groups that were founded in the 1940s, hot on the heels of the BSI being founded in 1934. And they were groups that are still extant today, groups like the Speckled Band of Boston and the Hounds of the Baskerville Sick and the Illustrious Clients of Indianapolis and the Copper Beeches of Philadelphia, the Six Napoleons of Baltimore, the Norwegian Explorers in Minnesota. I mean, really some great groups with strong traditions. And, for a new person coming in, it really has to be remarkable to be just bowled over, to be wowed by not only the august society, but the energy and enthusiasm of the people there gathered.
Yeah, and I was pretty lucky that, early on I kind of became the archivist, so I became the repository for all these papers that we've collected since the 1940s, and I have them today. And it's like getting into a time machine and going back in time to, you read these letters and the meeting notices and the postcards, and it's just fantastic. I mean, people just don't talk that way anymore. They don't write that way anymore. And everything was done by hand and by typewriter, and it's just a different time and place, and so lucky to have that. I couldn't have written my book without it.
Yeah,
part of me wonders how we're going to do this in the future when everything is by email.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I'm trying to document everything I can as well. But I want to get to your book in just a second. But when you started gathering all of this material, did you have in mind any kind of future publication? And were you aware at the time of the BSI history series?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I read that. And that's really the reason I did the book is, I talked about some of my mentors, Roy Pilot being one, but, probably my main mentor in my Sherlockian career was John Lellenberg. And John and I became good friends. And, he took me under his wing as a fellow historian of these things. And I modeled my work completely on John's archival history.
What sort of things did you learn from John as part of that process?
I mean, more of just how important it is to maintain the spirit and maintain the connections to these people who are long gone. And he told me a long time ago about his story of doing the BSI archival history, and he said he was worried that this would all disappear, and that was my worry too, that nobody would, people would stop caring, or people would forget about, Sherlockian greats like, Russell McLauchlin in Detroit, or Bob Harris, or Bill Raby, and all these folks that were around in the 40s and 50s, and I didn't want that to happen. So that was really the driving force for me. Plus, it's just fun to spend time in that era,
Yeah. It is. I mean, the 1940s were an interesting time. And unfortunately, these were the times when they were typically all male establishments in most of the places. The BSI, the amateur mendicants actually broke ranks fairly early on, had a co-ed gathering or more than one. But I'm interested in sharing with people some of the personalities of those early days. You mentioned Russell McLauchlin and Bob Harris. These are names that came to light through the Baker Street Journal and the BSI History Series. But for folks who haven't met them yet, what can you tell us about some of those early giants in the Amateur Mendicant Society?
So, I mean, the Amateur Mendicant Society was founded in 1946 by Russell McLauchlin. Russell McLauchlin was a newspaperman. He was a columnist and theater critic for the Detroit News. And I don't know exactly how, but he was friendly with Vincent Starrett. And, in 1946, he was in communication with Starrett, and Starrett said, I quote Starrett, he said, your credentials look excellent from where I sit, wherefore welcome to the BSI. I do things quick-like and by fiat, so by all means found a Detroit chapter if you can. And he did. So the Detroit chapter has been going since 1946 with this blessing from Vincent Starrett, and Russell McLauchlin was the man behind that. One of the other early members was a man named Bob Harris. Bob Harris was a BSI. He was the creeping man in the BSI. Bob Harris was an attorney with the Ford Motor Company. We also had great members in the 1940s and 50s, Bill Raby being the other one, famous BSI. So we had some really great characters back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, those are some legendary names. And
I will say, too, that, in going through the papers, the Mendicants, I think, in the 40s and 50s tended to look more to Chicago and to Starrett than they did to the East Coast. No offense to our East Coast friends, but they sort of made fun of the East Coast elite. They were Chicago-facing more than they were New York-facing in those early decades. I think Vincent Starrett was a big reason for that.
Well, one of the stories I like is about speaking of the East Coast, was on that very first evening of the Amateur Mendicant Society's meeting. The Speckled Band of Boston was meeting in Boston, April 26th, 1946. And during that first meeting of the Mendicants, and you documented this really well in your book, you said, greetings were read during the meeting from Christopher Morley, Edgar W. Smith, Vincent Starrett, and C.R. Andrew. The Mendicants exchanged telegrams with the Speckled Band of Boston, holding their meeting by the happiest of coincidences on the same evening. The band's message was sent by the Cheetah, James Keddy Jr., and it read, good luck to you on your first meeting. While you are luxuriating in your warehouse, we are uncoiling in our lair. And I think that camaraderie back then, that there was, we didn't have the internet. We certainly didn't have podcasts. People were listening to the Rathbone and Bruce stories on radio, though. The only way to connect with each other was through writing, telegrams, etc. The Baker Street Journal was brand new, and so groups were popping up all around the country and were encouraging each other and supporting each other and cheering each other on. It was just a wonderful time of collegiality.
The other big connection we had was with Edgar W. Smith. Edgar Smith, of course, was a New Yorker, but he worked for GM, and he spent a lot of time coming back and forth to Detroit. So whenever he was in Detroit, they would try to arrange special meetings of the Amateur Mendicant Society to coincide with Edgar's visits. And Edgar really liked his time with the Amateur Mendicants. He wrote a letter to Christopher Morley saying, the amateur mendicants in Detroit, easily under Russell McLauchlin's guidance, are the most erudite of the scions. 17 members were present at the meeting he attended, and opportunities for earnest and completely satisfying discussion were in sharp contrast to the overgatherings that the BSI in New York had become. So he really enjoyed his time in Detroit. He could maybe kick back a little bit more and enjoy it instead of having to run a meeting like he was with the BSI. That becomes evident in the archives that we have, his trips to Detroit.
Well, of course, one of the things that we're excited about with the Amateur Mendicant Society, and I guess, Bert, this is the part where you say, Scott, how did you get involved with the group?
Scott, if you don't mind, how is it? How is it? Could you remind me or tell me, or perhaps I've never asked you, how is it you got involved with the Amateur Mendicants?
Oh, Bert, what a great question. I hadn't considered that. So in 2008, moved out to Michigan from the Boston area with my family, taking a job at Ford Motor Company. And Chris already mentioned that Bob Harris had been general counsel for Ford. So, and of course that Edgar Smith was at GM. So I like to think that there was this great Detroit influence in the veins of the BSI and its science societies. And I discovered, much to my joy, that the Mendicants were still alive and thriving here. And I was able to make it to a handful of meetings over the years, and I would end up seeing more of my Michigan colleagues, our fellow Michiganders, in New York City at the BSI weekend than I would around the local parts here. But over time, my schedule allowed me to participate in more of the meetings. And John Cram, who Chris mentioned earlier, John was the Gasogene for 20 years, and which I think is the record for the person serving longest in that role. And Chris, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, no, right. That's right. These positions are usually for life or good behavior, and John was there for 20 years.
Yeah, and John's still alive, just to be
Yes.
clear. And he tapped me, I guess about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of stepping down, and clearly we don't have any other candidates, so we wondered if you would be willing to take over." And after a few heated discussions and a couple of good meals and lots of drinks, I said yes, and took on the mantle of Gasogene of the Amateur Mendicant Society. And, we've held a couple of meetings, and since I came on board, and we're getting ready for our 80th anniversary dinner on April 25th, 2026, 1 day short of the actual meeting. And lo and behold, thanks to Chris's book, I discovered where our first meeting was. The Mendicants met almost in a lower vault. It was in the Stag Room, which is in the lower level of a restaurant and jazz club called Cliff Bell's on Park Avenue in Detroit. And lo and behold, Cliff Bell's is still in operation today. And with Chris and the other members of the executive committee of the Amateur Mendicant Society, we did some research. We took a couple of field trips into the city and spent some time at Cliff Bell's, and we determined that it is the perfect place for us to return to for the occasion of our 80th anniversary celebration.
And it really is a great spot, Scott. You and I were there having cocktails, and it really is like a time machine or time capsule. I mean, it really did feel like 1946. It felt like Russell McLauchlin or Bob Harris was going to walk by us at any moment. So it really is a special place. I'm so glad it's still there, and I think it's going to be a great meeting.
It's still got an Art Deco theme. Lots of wood and brass and curves, and it's just really gorgeously done. Now, we can't convene downstairs the way they did in 1946 because, first of all, that was a group of only 12 people that first night. We're going to have a few more than that. But more importantly, they don't have that private facility downstairs anymore. That's all the kitchen downstairs. So they will be busy preparing our food down there while we are happily upstairs just in front of the stage where later that evening the jazz group will set up. I don't know if it's a trio, quartet, or a big old band or what, but and folks will have an opportunity to stay after our event if they want to stay on to Cliff Bell's to enjoy some dinner and some music there as well.
And I'm sure you'll say this, Scott, but we would love anybody to come. I mean, you don't have to be a Detroiter. Come spend the weekend with us in Detroit. And I think it's actually turning into a whole weekend of activities from Friday to Sunday. I think it's going to be a great time, a great celebration of just the Sherlockian camaraderie that's been going on since 1946. We'd love to have everybody there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to being there. A rare joint appearance with Scott. We only communicate, through messages put in bottles or rocks hurled over.
Well, it's out of security purposes. We usually aren't allowed to travel together on the same vehicle.
No. But I'm curious. So Chris, you've done this book. So many scions have done so many interesting things. Some scions have run annual Silver Blaze races, and some scions have like the Sons of the Copper Beeches and others, and the Speckled Band, publish irregular collections of essays and things. What are some of the highlights for the Mendicants in the 80 years? What have they been up to?
We've done a lot. Sometimes I do wish, and Scott and I have talked about this before, that we did a better job of preserving all of our papers, because I would have loved to put a compendium of papers together, but we just didn't do that. One thing about us is we don't take ourselves too seriously. If I look back over the past 80 years, we take the game serious, and we take all this stuff seriously. But we have fun. Having fun is the main part of this group, and we did that. And so sadly we don't have the papers to collect, but we had some really great meetings. One of the first televised broadcasts, I think it may have been the first televised broadcast of a Sherlock Holmes performance, was put on by the Amateur Mendicant Society in I forget the year, but it was an early one, and it was held at what became the Playboy Club of Detroit. It was a different restaurant at the time, but we've had, just so many interesting members come through.
We had an association with Zazu Pitts, didn't we?
Zazu Pitts, yeah, exactly right. She was. Was that a meeting? Do we have radio
was
play?
that part of the radio broadcast?
And so many people, so many interesting people. I think you talk about connections. You talk about Bob Harris, and Bob Harris was a member in the 1940s, but he was a member throughout the 1970s, and he became a mentor to Susan Rice. And Curtis Armstrong tells stories about being in awe of being a teenager meeting with Bob Harris, and those the memories continue throughout our time today. I think of someone like Bill Raby. Bill Raby came to his first meeting in the late 1940s, and he brought along a friend of his named John McCabe. John McCabe later became a BSI. He was a Shakespearean scholar, but he was also the founder of the Sons of the the Sons of the Desert, the Laurel and Hardy fan club. And I think the Sons of the Desert were built on the BSI model, and I don't know that the Sons of the Desert wouldn't exist if Bill Raby wouldn't have brought John McCabe to an Amateur Mendicant Society dinner, and McCabe later became a BSI. So these things are all connected, and that's what I mean, Bert. It's a collection of just wonderful memories and historical events and people over the last 80 years that I really hang my hat on, as opposed to a certain event, but just 80 years of great camaraderie and friendship, and that's what we pride ourselves on, I think, here in Detroit.
Yeah. So just looking through the records here. While you've been vamping, Chris, the recording for the radio was made on March 14th, 1947.
That's right.
It's called Mrs. Hudson Speaks. And the recording was made by Zazu Pitts, who I guess played Mrs. Hudson as the narrator there. And then in 1948, almost a year later, March 12th, 1948, was Tea Time in Baker Street, which was first broadcast by WWJ-TV. And it was later adapted for the stage and presented at the Players Club in Detroit.
That's right. A lot of good memories.
And of course,
I don't want to single out the 1940s too, Scott, because I think we've had three distinct eras. We had the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That was really a prime period for the amateur mendicants. We had a brief hiatus. I think Bill Raby, who had taken over the club, moved up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and things kind of lost steam for a couple of years. But then in the early 1970s, a group of Wayne State University professors sort of resurrected the club. Went strong again for a couple of decades. John Bennett Shaw was at Wayne State giving his class. Great BSIs came through that 1970s, people like Jeff Montgomery and Gene Lieb, and actually Jorge Luis Borges is a funny story. You talk about memories, Virgil. Luis Borges came to an amateur Mendicant Society dinner in the late 1970s, and he actually attended the Sherlock Holmes play at the Fisher Theater in Detroit when Leonard Nimoy was Sherlock Holmes in the William Gillette performance. That was a great memory. That was I forget the exact year, but I consider that sort of era 2. Era 3, was I call it the Roy Pilot years. Roy Pilot, great BSI, resurrected the club again in the 1990s. And Scott mentioned that John Cram ran the group for 20 years, and now Scott's running it. So we've been going off and on for quite a long time, and these very distinctive eras. And I tried to capture, the first 3 decades in my book, but volume 2 of that book is in progress. It's never been closer to being completed. That will cover the 70s and 80s, and I think we'll have a volume 3 at some point covering, today.
Well, and if folks want to get a copy of your book, it's a little hard to find. It was published by the Battered Silicon Dispatch Box. That's George Vanderberg. And I suppose folks can reach out to George and see if he still has some copies left. But otherwise, it looks like it's ABE Books and used bookstores, dealers, etc., where you might be able to find a copy. And maybe Chris will be able to convince you to do a reprint at some point.
I do have a couple copies. These are very niche publications, as I tell people.
Yeah. Well, bring them to the dinner.
I never thought we'd get rid of the 100 or so that I had in the first run, but sure enough, they sold out pretty quickly.
Oh, sure.
George did keep a couple copies, but they are kind of rarities.
Now, and just to be clear, too, about how some of the happenings at the Amateur Mendicant Society have reached beyond the Detroit area. In 1954, I believe it was, we were visited by one James Montgomery. I guess he had known at that point that he had a grim diagnosis as far as his heart was concerned, and he decided he wanted to get out and about and connect with Sherlockians in various places, and he made the trip to Detroit. And during that time, he regaled the group with Aunt Clara. And we have a recording of Aunt Clara, I think thanks to Bill Raby being there, if I'm not mistaken, and setting up his recording. And that, if you hear the recording of Jim Montgomery singing Aunt Clara, it is at the Amateur Mendicant Society meeting.
Yeah, Wessex Press did a great 2 CD edition a couple years ago, or many years ago now, I guess, but it was recordings of these old greats from yesteryear, and a lot of those recordings were done by Bill Raby because he would schlep his recording equipment wherever he went to capture these moments, and that's one of them.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away too much because you're going to be talking about some of the history of the Mendicants at the 80th anniversary meeting. But speaking of Bill Raby, first of all, we've had a longtime supporter in his son John, who works in public radio. And John, if you're listening, thank you very much. But Bill was legendary outside of the BSI because he was a really fantastic public relations man. He would invent things to attract attention, and many of them stuck. Like when he moved up to the Upper Peninsula, and he was doing publicity for, I think it was Lake Superior State. It was college, and it's now university. And he brought a tradition over from Germany where every spring they would have a snowman burning event to mark the end of winter. And he started the stone skipping contest I think it was on Lake Michigan. But he was also doing publicity part-time for the Grand Hotel at Mackinac Island, which is right up there between the upper and lower peninsulas. And he would have the strolling society where they would stroll along the world's longest porch, right? That's the 600-foot porch in front of the Grand Hotel. And what else? He started the annual list of banned words and phrases that is now in its 50th year. So a lot of these things have kept up and have just been a wonderful testament to the creativity of Bill Raby.
We've had a lot of interesting characters over the decades, and present company included.
Talk a little bit about the Beggar's Cup, because we're kind of resurrecting that. I would love to have your perspective on it.
The Beggar's Cup was an award that we used to give. We gave for many, many years to sort of recognize the best paper, best presentation of the year. And, it kind of went dormant for a couple of years, but you were wise to sort of want to resurrect that. And we're going to have the new Beggar's Cup tradition starting at our April meeting. We're going to have, a handful of presentations given that night. We'll have sort of a popular vote, and the winner will receive a shiny net cup as much as a bowl. Scott, you might want to explain what the bowl looks like, but this will be an award that they'll keep for the year, and then we'll do it again annually and pass the bowl on to somebody else. Yeah.
The thing is, our meetings were irregular, and the paper competition would be spread over many meetings. It would kind of be like the Academy Award of papers. Right. And to me, it's difficult to judge because there's different scenarios and different moods and whatnot. And I thought, why don't we compile that all into a single annual meeting? Because part of what I loved about the history is Russ McLauchlin set up the annual meeting and then rump meetings, right? So we can count on having an annual meeting and then however many rump meetings we want to have throughout the year, kind of less formal meetings. But I thought, why don't we build on the tradition of the Speckled Band, which has the Sherlock Holmes Bowl, and folks get to go home with that for a year and then get a replica of it as well. And why don't we take the Beggar's Cup and do the same kind of thing? So it's basically like a punch bowl and then all of the cups that come with the punch bowl as the keepsakes, the souvenirs. So it should be a lot of fun. And,
it's going to be great.
We're kicking it off in its new format at our 80th anniversary. We also have a wonderful visitor's guide for folks who may want to come in from out of town. Has hotel information, some optional informal events on Friday through Sunday, parking, local transportation, other activities, etc. So you'll want to check that out. We'll have a link.
We created a really nice weekend. It's sort of a mini BSI weekend, right, Scott? I think Friday night we're going to start it off with cocktails at another classic establishment downtown Detroit. We're going to have dinner at famous Detroit pizza place called Buddy's Pizza, which was also founded in 1946. We're going to have the trip to John King Books, which is the largest bookstore in Michigan, on Saturday morning. We'll have the dinner of the amateur Mendicants on Saturday afternoon, evening, and it's going to be a great weekend, I think.
Yeah, and I love that you pulled out the idea to do Buddies, because Detroit pizza it's starting to make its way across the country.
That's right.
And Buddies just happened to be founded the same year as the Mendicants, so it worked out really well.
And if people haven't been to Detroit in a long time, it's a completely different place than you might remember. It's a really thriving, bustling downtown now, and I think it'll make a nice weekend for anybody to come join us, or anytime.
And folks, if you'd like to check that out, we'll have a link to that in the show notes, and of course it is at amateurmendicantsociety.com.
Especially excited to see Bert. This is going to be great.
That won't last.
Well, then we'll be excited to see you go.
Yes. Now, it's always that way. Let me help you, people cry. And then I'm out in the street again.
Well, come and help us paint the town boring. No, it's going to be fantastic. And we do encourage anyone who's interested to check it out and to at least join the mailing list of the Amateur Mendicant Society. If you can't make this one, maybe there's a future one that you'd like to go to. And you can sign up for email updates from us at the website there. Well, Chris, anything else that we're missing or that we should fill in before we set people off?
No, I don't think so. We're just really excited to still be here after 80 years and excited to celebrate this milestone. And I know, Scott, you won't toot your own horn, but we want to thank you for being our fearless leader the past year or two. You've really elevated the club, and looking forward to another, I hate to say 80 years because we won't be around, but you never know. 80 more years of this stuff. Somebody else will be talking about it on a podcast, referencing old timers like you and me. But,
yeah, there you go.
This is
well, it's the reason the Amateur Mendicants work is because we are a society, and I've got a wonderful executive committee that supports what we're doing here, and everyone plays a role and is happy to be here, and that's what it's all about.
That's right.
It's great that there are these groups that go back to this. You pointed it out. I hadn't thought about that really, but that was a magic time in the 1940s. And how unusual that the Speckled Band and the Mendicants would have their first meeting on the same night. It's really remarkable. And you think about those 8 groups, these sort of 8 cities back in these pre-war years. How magical that everything sort of came together.
Yeah, I mean, look, you had New York, obviously where it all started, and Boston, and Chicago, and Detroit. And at the time, Detroit was the second largest city in the country. So it was no shrinking backwater by any stretch of the imagination. It loomed large, certainly in those post-war years in American culture. And really how fortunate we were that Edgar Smith worked for a company that had its headquarters right in Detroit. So he was, I want to say, bi-coastal. I mean, we do have coasts here in Michigan. We're a peninsula, But Edgar would spend time not only in Europe, because he was in charge of international affairs, but between New York and Detroit. So it was a wonderful beginning. And let's hope we still have the fuel to continue on well into the future. Well, we've been getting lots of great feedback about our newest segment, Examining the Pictures. Christian Mongard is a professional film critic and journalist, and he's doing a fantastic job, we think. And you think, evidently, according to the feedback. So we're continuing on with that series with his latest entry.
Sherlock Holmes in New York. No, not that one. Much more modern and quite a lot better. My name is Christian Mongard. Welcome to Examining the Pictures. I was more than a little skeptical when the American television network, CBS, in 2012 announced that they would produce their own Sherlock Holmes series, not long after Sherlock began airing on BBC in the UK. CBS had tried to lure the 2 men behind that series, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, to the United States to try and recreate the success of Sherlock. But when the duo quite understandably declined, the network instead hired Robert Doherty to write an entirely new series. Doherty had previously worked on other series like Star Trek Voyager, Dark Angel and Medium as a writer and later producer. His Sherlock Holmes series, Elementary, is also set in the present day, but the story was moved to New York and Watson became a woman. I was not enthusiastic to begin with, and I didn't particularly like the first season. However, I found the second season to be better, and over the course of its 7 seasons, it ran from 2012 to 2019, I grew to not only like but actually love Elementary. It quickly found its own footing, rhythm and tone. The episodes are perhaps not crafted with quite the same care as Sherlock's, whose 4 seasons consist of only 3 90-minute episodes each and 1 Christmas special, while Elementary is made up of 6 seasons consisting of 21 to 24 episodes and 1 final season of only 13 episodes. Johnny Lee Miller, who plays a British Holmes in America, and Lucy Liu, who plays Joan Watson, are a strong match, and the verbal banter between the two is excellent. At times playful, at times serious, and at times even moving as their friendship develops. He is a recovering drug addict, she is initially his sober companion, but through the seasons they become equal partners in detecting, helping to solve cases for the NYPD.
On the day of the Brazilian Day parade, okay, the place you met him is like the heart of Little Brazil. It would have been wild that night, so...
So you thought the local news media might have footage from the bar that evening?
Yeah, well, you know, they love all that stuff, the celebrations and parades. Okay, so I called Channel 3 and I asked around, and sure enough, they have B-roll from that night. So if I'm lucky, Jen and her mystery man are going to be on
I
it.
cannot indulge this trifle any longer. We have a real case. Russell Gertz's nail salon come loan sharking lair awaits.
And I will be there in a minute.
It was me. I slept with your friend. Ravaged, actually. I'm Tony. I'm on that tape. She has a beauty mark here. She has size 6 feet. She bites her nails and thankfully nothing else.
Holmes is still the eccentric genius who can seemingly solve a case with little more than a glance at a crime scene. But Watson becomes invaluable to him as a sounding board, and it is not uncommon for her to be the one who finds the crucial clue. That dynamic is important for the series, which is very intelligently and humorously written. Holmes can be more than a little rude, and not seldomly it is up to Watson to be the human factor in their working relationship. She is a former surgeon who was suspended for making a mistake that killed a patient, and she chose to leave the profession and work with addicts to atone for that mistake. Her medical knowledge is crucial to Holmes, and she also becomes a detective in her own right. She has the talent which he recognizes and hones over the seasons. And like in Sherlock, the relationship between Holmes and Watson in Elementary is more psychologically and emotionally complex than in Dr. Watson's stories, and therefore more in keeping with the times. The series is filled with references to the canonical stories, but Doherty does not try directly to rewrite them for a modern audience and the New York setting. Instead, he surrounds Holmes and Watson with characters and names you know. Gregson, played by Aidan Quinn, is the captain at the NYPD whom Holmes works with. Detective Bell, played by John Michael Hill, is Gregson's right-hand man. Moriarty makes an appearance in the series, as does Sebastian Moran. Also, Brother Mycroft, played by Rhys Ifans, shows up, and later the brother's father, a somewhat shadowy figure of finance and international mystery. Musgrave is mentioned, and both Shinwell and Kitty Winter turn up as important supporting characters later on. Elementary is in some ways a murder-a-week series where Holmes and Watson solve baffling cases that the NYPD can't get a hold on. That part of the series is very satisfying. The murders themselves are oftentimes elaborate and gruesome, and the way our dynamic duo solve them, brilliant. Modern technology is very much a part of the series, and Holmes makes good use of it. In one episode, he reveals that one of his hobbies is planting through the internet far-fetched theories amongst conspiracy theorists. But there are also longer story arcs that has to do with the lost love of Holmes, Irene Adler. She was killed when he worked for Scotland Yard in London, which was the reason he started using drugs. He was put into rehab in New York, and Joan Watson was hired as his sober companion. But is Irene really dead, and what is the identity of Moriarty? These are two of the big questions in the first season of Elementary. Other lingering questions of a both criminalistic and humanistic character are explored in the following seasons. I've seen the whole series 3 or 4 times now, and I must admit that it grows on me every time. I have even grown to enjoy the first season in a way I didn't think possible. In fact, I've just rewatched that before writing this review, and it is very good. CBS wanted a copy of Sherlock, and perhaps that was the assignment for Robert Doherty to begin with, but Elementary is very much its own series. On the surface, it is far from Watson's stories, but in the atmosphere, the sense of humor, the relationship between Holmes and Watson, and of course, the construction of the mysteries, it does honor the legacy it now has become a proud part of. It is not only Sherlock Holmes by name, but also in its characters and its writing. I do believe that Watson would have liked this interpretation of his work. I'm Christian Mongard. This is Examining the Pictures. Thank you for listening.
What a treat. What a treat.
It is a treat. Well, it makes me want to take another look at Elementary, that's for sure. That's
I know. I was kind of in the same boat as he was, where I initially thought, how good can this be? But with his recommendation, it takes on a different weight.
Mm.
Well, of course, it is time now for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. That's right, it's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to come up with the Sherlock Holmes story in question. And if you get it right, that means your name gets entered into the drawing to possibly be our winner. And this time around, we have something from the vault for people from the last episode. Now, what was that last episode's clue? It sounded something like this. At 6 a.m. near Aldgate Station, Mason's finding alarmed the nation. Bert, do your worst.
Well, it's easy. That's a terrific case. It's when an alarmed and nervous landlord consults Holmes about a very strange person who's rented a room. Holmes has to use a mirror to crack the case of the disguised old eccentric. That's the one Watson called the Veiled Codger.
Oh. You know, Bert, over time, I've listened to your attempts here, and I've been wondering if we've been using you to your fullest potential. And today I realize that we have.
Well, I guess you're trying to tell me to look for another job.
No,
I've heard
no.
this before.
Well, no, that was quite incorrect, as you've come to expect. And Eric Deckers is going to back you up here. He writes in, Sarmhath, I've solved it. That's Scots Gaelic, by the way. This is a story where Holmes goes undercover in 13th century Scotland to help William Wallace recover stolen plans necessary in the First War of Scottish Independence against King Edward I of England. It's the story Watson called The Adventure of the Brave Hartington Plans. Oh, Eric, that's almost as bad as Bert's. Except I don't recall any stories that took place in Scotland, writes Eric, or the late 1200s. So it's more likely the Bruce Partington plans. That note, I almost went with the Robert the Bruce Partington plans. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Eric. Well, Eric does point us in the right direction. And by the way, before we do our drawing, we should note that we're going to have something on the website from Eric in the coming days. So you'll want to check that out sometime shortly after April 1st. So stay tuned. So let's bring out the prize wheel and give it a big spin. And let's see who from all of these lovely entries gets it right. And it looks like it is number 42. 42, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And in this case, it is also the answer to our winner, Edward Lear. Ed, congratulations. Your faithful entry maker. So we're delighted that your name came up this time around. We will have something from our vault for you. So stay tuned. Now, if you would like to be like Ed, then you're going to want to do your best in answering this clue. Begun with pleasant lassitude from a bath and then a smoke, the flame-like woman finished with a packet 'neath her cloak. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email. Address the comment at ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If we choose your name at random from all the correct entries, you'll win. Good luck. Okay. Wow.
Okay.
We did it.
Hooray!
So you're coming to Detroit.
I sure am.
Man.
Looking forward to it.
We're going to have to prep the city for you, mister. I got to sweep up.
Not for me.
Oh, we'll have a good time, though. John K. King Books, legendary bookshop. Used to be a glove factory.
Really? Glove factory.
4 stories of books, over 1 million titles under the roof there.
Have you bought anything wonderful there over the years?
I have bought many things there. I mean, the present state of my library can be blamed on John King. Trying to recall anything in particular. I've gotten the history of the Ford family, some histories of the Ford family there. I've gotten some wonderful books about Wagner and Beethoven. The Sherlockian collection has expanded there. I actually found a copy of, was it Orlando Park's book about medicine in the canon? It's actually double dust jacketed. It has 2 dust jackets from 2 different volumes.
Well, that's because it's about medical things, and they wanted to.
Yeah, the white jacket, right?
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. I think I've picked up a couple of Baring Gould annotateds there.
A couple of Baring Gould annotateds?
Well, because I found one that was in a better state than mine. Mine had torn dust jackets, and this one was better. And then, of course, I found a first edition there, and I had to get the first edition.
Now, when you do that, what happens to the other editions that you have?
They move over and make room on the shelf.
Of course they do.
I can't find it in myself to get rid of one. I mean, so I've got a 1-volume annotated Sherlock Holmes. That was the first Baring Gould that I had. A single volume, right?
Yeah, but that was a later printing.
It was. But to me, first of all, it's the convenience of having a single volume, and it's sentimental, okay? And then the second one I got, that's 2 volumes. I can't remember why I'm hanging on to that one. There's got to be a reason. I've got the first edition one. I've got the better condition one. So yeah, there's a method to my madness.
Well, I'm sure.
You'll see when you get here. Don't be shocked when you walk in.
No.
But anyway, Detroit, lovely in the spring, lovely in the summer, lovely in the fall. And
chilly in the winter.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Well, folks here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, our listeners, you are lovely all the time, and we thank you for that and hope that you continue on with us for many episodes to come. We've really got some dynamite interviews lined up in the next months ahead, so stick with us and support the show if you can. If you can't afford to give us as little as $1 a month, that's okay. But why don't you leave us a rating or a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and share the show with other people who you might think could use it. In the meantime, I am the really useful Scott Monty.
And I'm the occasionally obstructive Burt Wolder.
Get out of my way, kid. And until next time, we say... The games A foot?
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.